It was just another slow morning at the diner. The smell of coffee mixed with burnt toast, and the hum of the old ceiling fan was the soundtrack to my everyday life. I had worked there long enough to memorize the rhythm of it all. The regulars who came in at the same time, sat at the same tables, ordered the same meals. My name is Kate, and I've been a waitress at Murphy's Diner since I was 19. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I didn't expect much from the world, not after losing my dad when I was 12. One day he was there, the next he was gone. No explanations, no goodbye, just a silence that followed us for years. Mom said he left because he couldn't handle the responsibility. I wanted to believe her, but sometimes late at night, I used to dream he'd just walk through the door again, smiling like nothing had happened. I guess part of me never stopped waiting for that. That morning I was wiping down the counter when the doorbell jingled. The air shifted just slightly, like the moment before a storm when you can sense something coming even if you can't see it yet. A group of men in expensive suits walked in, clearly out of place in a small-town diner like ours. Their shoes gleamed, their watches flashed under the fluorescent lights, and the smell of money followed them like cologne. But one of them caught my attention. He didn't fit with the rest, even though he was clearly the one they all seemed to orbit around. He had this quiet confidence about him, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you've built. His face looked familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. He sat down by the window, barely glanced at the menu, and said in a calm voice, "Coffee. Black. No sugar." I nodded, pretending it was just another order, but something about him unsettled me. When I came back with his coffee, he thanked me politely but didn't look up. His voice was deep, steady, the kind that lingered in the back of your mind long after it was gone. When it was time to bring their check, I set it down gently and waited while he signed. I wasn't trying to look, but my eyes landed on the paper, and in that instant my breath caught in my throat. That signature. The slant of the letters, the sharp stroke at the end, the way the ink curled into a small flick. I knew it. I had seen it before years ago on my birthday cards, on old bills, on a note I kept folded in my dresser drawer for years. My hand trembled as I whispered before I could stop myself, "That's my dad's signature." He froze mid-motion, his pen still in hand. Slowly, his gaze lifted to meet mine. There was something in his eyes, shock, maybe, or guilt, but before I could say another word, his expression hardened again. "Excuse me," he said softly, like he needed to be sure he'd heard me right. I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady. "That signature, it's my father's. Richard Kane. He used to sign everything exactly like that." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he set the pen down carefully, almost as if it were something fragile. "I'm sorry," he said, standing up. "You must be mistaken." But he wasn't. I could feel it in my bones. He left a $100 bill under the check, nodded politely, and walked toward the door. I wanted to stop him, to demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. He pushed open the door, sunlight spilling in around him, and for just a second before he left, he looked back at me. There was something in that glance that made my heart twist, a quiet recognition, a kind of sorrow that only made the silence louder. Then he was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, the signed check in my hand, staring at his name. The ink looked so ordinary, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it had just unlocked something I wasn't ready to face. My father's name. My father's handwriting. My father's absence that never made sense. I thought about Mom, about how she used to get quiet when I asked about him, how her eyes would glaze over before she changed the subject. She always said some wounds were better left closed. But now that the door had cracked open, I couldn't pretend I didn't want to know what was behind IBY morning. I made up my mind. I needed answers. The only clue I had was the name printed on the receipt. Kane Industries. I didn't even know it existed until that moment. I looked it up on my phone, and there it was, a billion-dollar corporation based in the city, run by none other than Garrett Kane, the man who had signed that check. The man who had looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. My hand shook as I packed my bag and caught the first bus to the city. I didn't know what I was going to say or how I'd even get past security, but something inside me told me I had to try. I owed it to that 12-year-old girl who used to stare out the window every night waiting for her father to come home. The bus ride felt endless. I clutched the signed receipt the entire time, tracing the curves of the letters with my thumb, whispering under my breath, "It's him. I know it's him." When I finally arrived, the building towered above me, all glass and steel, shimmering in the morning light. The sign at the top read Kane Enterprises. My heart stopped. Inside, the marble floor gleamed so brightly I could see my reflection in it. The receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I need to see Mr. Kane," I said, trying to sound confident. "Do you have an appointment?" I hesitated. "No, but he's my father." Her smile faltered for the first time. "I'm sorry." Before I could try to explain, I heard that same deep voice from across the lobby. "Let her through." I turned and there he was, Garrett Kane, the man from the diner, the man with my father's signature. His expression was calm, but his eyes told a different story. There was recognition, disbelief, and something else. Fear. He motioned for me to follow. My feet moved before my brain could catch up. The elevator doors closed behind us with a quiet hiss. The silence was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the elevator rising, feel the tension thick between us. I looked at him, really looked this time. The strong jawline, the silver at his temples, the same dimple I used to see in the mirror when I smiled. My chest tightened. He didn't look at me. His voice was low, distant. "You shouldn't have come here." I swallowed. "Then why did you let me in?" He didn't answer. The elevator dinged softly, and the doors opened to a floor lined with glass offices and city views that stretched for miles. He stepped out, his pace steady, his shoulders heavy with something I couldn't name. I followed, clutching the receipt in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know what I was walking into, but every instinct told me that the truth waiting on the other side of that office door was going to change everything I thought I knew about my father, my past, and who I really was. And deep down I already knew I was right. The elevator doors closed behind us, and for a few moments, there was only silence, thick, uncomfortable silence. I could hear the faint hum of the building, the distant murmur of people working on the floors below. But inside that small space, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. I kept glancing at him, trying to catch even the smallest flicker of recognition or emotion, but his face was unreadable. He looked straight ahead, his jaw tense, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh. For years, I had imagined what it would be like to see my father again, to ask him why he left, to make him see how much his absence had cost me. But now that he was standing right next to me, I couldn't find a single word to say. When the elevator finally stopped, he stepped out first, not even checking if I was following. His office was massive, walls of glass, shelves lined with awards and family photos, the kind that scream success and legacy. A large painting hung behind his desk, something abstract and expensive looking, but my eyes weren't drawn to the art. They were drawn to the photograph sitting on the corner of his desk, a family portrait. Him, a woman with sharp, elegant features, and a young man who looked about my age. My throat went dry. So he had another family, another daughter maybe, another life that didn't include me. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk that I sat, my hands trembling in my lap. He walked around the desk, rested his palms on the surface, and studied me for a moment. "You said something at the diner," he began, his tone careful. "About a signature." I swallowed hard. "It wasn't just a signature. It was yours. My father's." His eyes flickered for a second, then he looked away. "Your father is dead." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "He disappeared when I was 12. My mother said he left us. She never told me why. But I remember his handwriting. I still have his notes. You signed that check exactly the same way." He exhaled slowly, as if the air itself was heavy. Then finally he sat down. "Your name?" "Kate," I said. "Kate Reynolds." The moment I said it, his expression shifted, barely but enough. He knew that name. He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together. "Your mother's name is?" "Laura," I whispered. That was when I saw it. His composure cracked just for a second. His face paled, and he closed his eyes like he was hearing ghosts. When he opened them again, something inside me already knew the answer before he even said a word. "Kate," he said quietly, "I think you should leave." "No," I said, leaning forward. "Not until you tell me the truth." "There's no truth to tell. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost? He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us like a thread pulled too tight. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, he stood up, turned his back to me, and looked out the window. Your mother and I, it was a long time ago. Things ended badly. So you're admitting it, I said, rising to my feet. You are my father. He turned slowly, and for the first time I saw it, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. I didn't know you were still alive, he said quietly. His words hit me like a punch. What do you mean? I thought your mother took you and left the country. I tried to find you. I even hired people, but every lead ended cold. He paused, his voice trembling for the first time. When I couldn't find you, I assumed. He stopped himself, swallowing the rest of the sentence. I stared at him, trying to piece together the shards of my life that suddenly didn't make sense. Why would she lie to me? Why would she tell me you abandoned us? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because I did something unforgivable. I felt my chest tighten. What did you do? He didn't answer immediately. He just sat back down, his shoulders heavy, his eyes distant. I built this empire, he said finally. But I built it by crossing lines I shouldn't have crossed. People got hurt. And your mother, she was one of them. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. You're talking like this is business. You're talking like she was just collateral damage. He flinched at that. It's not that simple, Kate. You don't know the whole story. Then tell me. I shouted, my voice cracking. Tell me why you left. Tell me why you let me grow up thinking you didn't care. He looked at me for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Because loving you meant putting you in danger. My heart stopped. What? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Your mother knew things about people I worked with, deals I made. When she found out, she threatened to go to the police. I tried to stop her, but by then it was too late. There were people watching us. Dangerous people. I thought if I disappeared, they'd stop looking. That they'd leave you both alone. I stared at him, disbelief twisting into anger. So you just ran away? You let her raise me alone while you built this empire on lies. His voice broke. I did what I had to do to keep you alive. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to tell him that nothing could ever justify what he'd done. But part of me, some small broken part, understood. The fear in his eyes wasn't fake. It was the kind of fear that doesn't fade even after years of success. Then I remembered something. The men at the diner, I said softly. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like bodyguards. He didn't respond. You're still in danger, aren't you? I asked. He sighed, rubbing his temples. There are people who never forget, Kate. People who would do anything to destroy me. And anyone connected to me. Like me, I said. He looked up, his eyes full of guilt. Like you. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The city lights outside glittered against the glass, but inside that office, it felt like the world had gone still. Finally, he said quietly, You can't tell anyone who I am. Not yet. I laughed bitterly. You think I want to tell anyone? You think I even know who you are anymore? He stood, walked around the desk, and stopped just a few feet away from me. I know you hate me, he said softly. And maybe you should. But you have to trust me when I say everything I've done, every choice I made, it was to protect you. I looked at him, my voice trembling. Then start proving it. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Come with me. He led me to a small private elevator tucked behind a mirrored wall. We descended into a dimly lit basement level, far from the polished halls of his empire. The doors opened to a secured room, lined with metal cabinets and old files. He entered a code on the keypad, and a drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. My mother. Me as a child. Newspaper clippings. Documents marked confidential. My eyes widened. You kept all this? I never stopped looking for you, he said quietly. Even when I thought you were gone. I picked up one of the photos, a picture of me at a school play, maybe 8 years old. How did you even get this? He didn't answer, but his silence told me enough. He had been watching. From afar. Always there, but never close enough to touch. I set the photo down and turned to him. Tears spilling down my cheeks. You don't get to call yourself my father now. You don't get to show up and act like you cared all along. I know, he whispered. But I had to make sure you were safe. I took a shaky breath. Safe from what? He looked at me with haunted eyes. From the same people who might be watching us right now. And just as he said it, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the entire floor went dark. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to sound. The sound of the alarm cut through the silence like a blade. A red emergency light began to flash somewhere overhead, casting the entire room in a pulsing blood-colored glow. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, trying to understand what was happening. What is that? I whispered, my voice trembling. Garrett, my father, was already on his feet, his expression turning sharp, calculating. We need to move, he said quietly but firmly. Now. He grabbed my wrist, not roughly but with urgency, pulling me toward the elevator. The moment we stepped inside, I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. What's happening? I asked again, louder this time. Is this them? The people you were talking about? He didn't answer right away. He just hit a button on the panel, and the elevator began to rise fast. They found me sooner than I expected, he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. And if they know who you are? The elevator shuddered suddenly and stopped. My stomach dropped. What's happening? I gasped. He pressed a few buttons but nothing responded. They've cut the power, he muttered. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hum of the emergency light. Then I heard it, a faint sound echoing through the shaft. A metallic clank. Then another. Someone was trying to force the elevator doors open from below. He took a deep breath, looked up at the emergency hatch and then at me. Climb, he said. What? Now, Kate. Climb. He pushed me toward the hatch, his hand steady even as his voice trembled. I climbed up, my hand slipping against the cold metal. He followed close behind, shoving the hatch open with a strength that didn't match his age. The sound of boots echoed below us now, voices shouting. They're in the building, someone yelled. Garrett hoisted me up through the opening, then climbed out after me. We were inside a narrow maintenance tunnel above the elevator shaft, the kind of place that smelled like rust and dust and fear. We crawled in silence for what felt like forever, the red light flashing behind us through the cracks. Finally, we reached a small hatch that led into another hallway. He pushed it open carefully, peeking out before helping me through. We stepped into what looked like a storage level, dimly lit, lined with cleaning supplies and electrical panels. He turned to me, breathing hard. You can't go back to your old life now, he said. They've seen you with me. I stared at him, my hands shaking. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to know why you left. I know, he said, softer now. But the truth comes with consequences. I wanted to scream, to tell him I didn't care about his secrets, his empire, his enemies. But deep down I knew it was too late for that. The world I'd known, the quiet diner, the routine, the safety of not knowing, was gone. He looked around quickly, then pulled a phone from his pocket. He tapped a few buttons and a hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passageway that looked like something out of a spy movie. This way, he said. There's a safe exit that leads to the garage. I hesitated. How do you have all this? He met my eyes, his expression grim. Because I built this company knowing someday I might have to disappear again. We slipped through the passage, the sound of distant shouting echoing through the walls. The floor vibrated faintly, like someone was running above us. My palms were slick with sweat. My brain couldn't process it. This was the man who had signed a diner check just 24 hours ago. And now we were running for our lives through secret hallways like fugitives. To the end of the passage, a reinforced door waited. He entered another code, and it opened to a private garage lined with sleek black cars. He led me to one parked in the far corner, a silver sedan with tinted windows. Get in, he said. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather cold against my skin. He started the engine and the car roared to life. As we sped out of the garage and into the night, I looked back and saw shadows moving behind the glass of the building, men in dark suits, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Who are they? I asked finally. The people I used to work with, he said, gripping the wheel tightly. When I left, I took something they wanted. What did you take? He hesitated. Proof. Proof of what? He looked at me for a moment, his expression haunted. That the empire I built wasn't entirely mine. I frowned, confusion mixing with fear. I don't understand. You will, he said quietly. We drove for hours, the city lights fading into endless highways and dark forests. At some point, exhaustion took over and I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the car was parked outside a secluded cabin surrounded by trees. The air was cold, crisp, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the leaves. Where are we? I asked groggily. A safe house, he said, getting out. No one knows about this place. Inside, the cabin was small but comfortable. A single fireplace, a couple of old chairs, and a wooden table stacked with files. Everything felt temporary, like someone had lived here on the run before. He handed me a folder. You wanted the truth, he said. Here it is. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside were documents, contracts, bank records, photographs. My father with men whose faces were blurred or scratched out. Notes written in his handwriting. One line caught my eye, scrawled across the margin. Project Seraphim. What is this? I asked. He sighed, sitting across from me. It started as a business venture, clean energy, defense technology, things that could change the world. But the investors had other plans. They turned it into something darker. When I found out, I tried to shut it down. That's when everything went wrong. I flipped through the papers, each one worse than the last. Experiments. Illegal funding. Disappearances. You were part of this? Yes, he said quietly. Until I wasn't. Until I realized what it was doing to people. That's when I walked away. I looked up, my voice cracking. And Mom. He closed his eyes. She found out. She threatened to expose everything. They came for her. I got her out, but I couldn't get back to you in time. By the time I tried, she'd hidden you. Changed your name. Erased every trace of who you were. I felt dizzy. So she lied to protect me. He nodded. She thought if you believed I was gone, they'd stop looking. My vision blurred with tears. And now they know I'm not just some waitress from a diner. I'm your daughter. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. That I dropped the folder on the table. What happens now? He looked into the fire, his expression unreadable. Now, I make sure they never find you again. I shook my head. I'm not running. Not again. You don't have a choice, he said. They will come. They always do. Just then, a sound outside made both of us freeze. A car door slamming, faint voices cutting through the night. He stood, motioning for me to stay quiet. He moved to the window, peered through the blinds. How did they? He whispered, then stopped. Headlights flickered through the trees. He turned to me. His voice steady but urgent. There's a tunnel behind the cabin. Go now. Don't look back. What about you? I'll hold them off. No. I cried. I'm not leaving you again. He looked at me, and for the first time there was no distance in his eyes, just a father looking at his daughter. You have to, Kate. Because this time I'm not running. Before I could argue, the front door shattered with a crash. Shadows poured in, dark, fast, armed. My father grabbed a gun from a drawer and fired a warning shot. Go! He shouted. I stumbled toward the back. The world around me dissolving into chaos. The sound of gunfire, shouting, the smell of smoke. I found the trapdoor, pushed it open, and crawled into the tunnel. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The last thing I heard before the tunnel door slammed shut behind me was his voice, strong, fierce, and final. Run, Kate! And then there was nothing but darkness. It's strange how quickly life can change. One moment, you're wiping down tables in a diner, wondering how you'll afford next month's tuition. And the next, you're standing inside a world you never imagined belonged to you. For weeks after that day, everything felt unreal. Every sound, every conversation, every glimpse of the city lights from my father's office window felt like stepping into someone else's life. But it was mine. Somehow it had always been mine, I just didn't know it yet. People often imagine that discovering a secret like that would bring nothing but joy. They picture the happy endings, the tearful reunions, the promises to never lose touch again. But the truth is, healing isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's awkward and uncomfortable. Sometimes it's quiet, So quiet you can hear your own heart breaking and mending at the same time. That my father tried to make up for everything he'd missed, and I could see the guilt in his eyes every time he looked at me. He'd show up at the diner before closing, sitting in the corner booth where I first saw him, pretending to read the menu just so he could watch me work. The first time I caught him doing it, I laughed. "You know you can just wait at home," I told him. "You don't have to sit here pretending to crave pancakes." He smiled, that small boyish smile that made him look years younger. "Maybe I'm not pretending," he said. "Maybe I just like watching my daughter in her element." Those were the moments that made everything else fade away. The awkward silences, the late-night talks that ended with tears, the fear that this miracle might not last. It was in those moments that I realized love doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to show up. 6 months passed like a blur. My mother, once so worn down by years of hard work and quiet sorrow, had started to glow again. I'd catch her humming while cooking, her face soft, peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. My father was patient with her. He never rushed, never demanded forgiveness. He simply showed up, every day, doing small things, bringing her coffee in the mornings, helping her fix the leaky sink, leaving her handwritten notes that said things like, "I never stopped loving you." And my mother, she tried to resist at first, tried to build walls around her heart the way she had for years. But the truth is, love has a way of seeping through cracks you thought were sealed. One morning I came downstairs and found them dancing in the kitchen. No music, just the soft rhythm of old memories. I stood there watching them, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, peace. When I left for Columbia, I thought I'd be overwhelmed, that I'd feel like an outsider among the students who had grown up in privilege. But instead, I felt something entirely different. I felt ready. Because I had already lived 100 different lives before stepping foot on that campus. I'd been the daughter of a single mother, the waitress who worked double shifts to keep the lights on, the girl who thought she'd lost everything, and now the woman who knew what it meant to be found at. My father made it a point to never let his money define our relationship. He didn't just write checks and disappear into meetings. He helped me study for exams, asked about my classes, showed up unannounced with lunch during finals week. The first time he walked through the Columbia gates to meet me, a few students stared. Everyone knew who he was, the billionaire, the CEO, the man whose name was printed across skyscrapers. But to me, he was just Dad, the man who once signed a diner receipt that changed both our lives. One evening, we sat together on the rooftop terrace of his apartment, the city stretching out like a field of light beneath us. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, I used to think success was measured in zeros and titles, but now I know it's measured in moments like this." I asked him what he meant and he smiled. "It's knowing I can sit here with you, and that you're not afraid to tell me the truth even when it's hard." I remember laughing softly. "That's a strange definition of success." "It's the only one that matters," he said. And maybe he was right. Because as I sat there watching the skyline flicker and pulse like a heartbeat, I realized something profound. My life hadn't been broken by what I didn't have. It had been built by what I did. A mother who refused to let go, a father who found his way back, and a love that had survived 24 years of silence. Their wedding was small, intimate. No grand ballroom, no photographers, no speeches written by assistants. Just us. The pastor's voice trembled slightly as he asked them to take their vows, and for a second, I thought about all the years they'd lost. My mother's eyes shimmered as she said, "I do," and my father's hand shook when he slipped the ring onto her finger. But when they kissed, the world seemed to go still. It wasn't about the ceremony, it was about everything that came before. Every struggle, every tear, every night they both wondered if they'd ever find each other again. After the ceremony, he called me over and handed me a small box. Inside was a gold necklace, simple but stunning. The pendant was a tiny engraving of the photo I'd found months earlier, the one of them standing by the lake. "I had it made from the original," he said. "That picture brought us back together. Now it belongs to you." I didn't even try to hold back the tears. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you." He touched my cheek gently. "No, Kate. Thank you for finding me, even when you didn't know you were looking." Years later, when I opened my own nonprofit foundation, I understood what he meant about legacies. It wasn't about wealth or buildings or numbers, it was about people. About lives changed because someone chose to care. I went back to Murphy's Diner the week before my foundation's launch. The place hadn't changed much. The same flickering neon sign, the same red vinyl booths, even the same smell of fresh coffee and pancakes. Pete, my old manager, saw me and broke into the biggest grin. "Look who it is," he said, throwing his arms wide. "The one who made it out." "I didn't make it out," I said with a laugh. "I just found my way back." We talked for hours, catching up, laughing about the old days. Then I told him about my foundation, about how I wanted Murphy's to be one of our first partner locations. We're going to help single mothers and students get job training, education, everything I once needed but couldn't afford, I explained. Pete's eyes softened. "You mean you're giving people their own second chance?" I smiled. "Exactly." As I sat in that same booth where I'd once recognized my father's signature, I looked around and realized how everything had come full circle. The walls that had witnessed my struggle now stood as quiet reminders of how far I'd come. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Proud of you, kiddo. Can't wait to see what you build next." I smiled and typed back, "I learned from the best." But the truth was, I'd learned from both of them. From my father, I learned ambition and vision, the belief that you can build something from nothing. From my mother, I learned sacrifice, strength, and unconditional love. And from both of them, I learned that some bonds can bend but never break. Sometimes when I walk past the diner late at night, I stop for a moment and look through the window. The lights always glow softly against the glass, and the laughter of strangers fills the air. And I think about that day, the day a billionaire CEO signed his name and unknowingly rewrote all our destinies. People ask me if I believe in fate. I used to say no, that life is just a series of choices and consequences. But now I think fate is just love's way of finding its way home. And maybe that's what happened that day. Maybe it wasn't just coincidence. Maybe it was the universe saying it's time. Because in the end, it wasn't his signature that changed everything, it was the love behind it. The years that followed were softer, slower, and somehow more alive. There were no dramatic endings, no grand climaxes, just the quiet rhythm of a life finally finding its balance. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing in the middle of my apartment, staring out at the skyline and thinking, so this is what peace feels like. It wasn't loud, it didn't shout for attention. It just existed, like sunlight slipping through curtains on a Sunday morning. But peace doesn't mean life stops testing you. It just means you finally understand how to face the storm. My foundation grew faster than I ever expected. What started as a small project to help women and students like me turned into something much larger. We had offices across the state, volunteers, and partnerships with companies that wanted to make a difference. I worked long hours, met hundreds of people, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't serving coffee or clearing tables, I was serving purpose. Still, every success came with moments of reflection. I'd stand on stages at fundraisers, delivering speeches in elegant halls filled with people in designer suits, and I'd think about that night. The night I realized my father's signature matched the one on that old document. The ink had changed everything, but it wasn't about the paper. It was about the truth it carried. I'd look out into the crowd, and somewhere near the back, I'd always find my father. He never missed an event. He'd stand there with that quiet pride in his eyes, the same look he had the first time he told me, "You're my greatest accomplishment." One night after a gala, we sat together on the balcony of his home, the city lights glowing beneath us like scattered stars. He handed me a glass of wine and said, "You know, sometimes I still can't believe I almost missed out on knowing you." I turned to him and smiled. Maybe we were just waiting for the right time. He chuckled softly. "Maybe. But time isn't kind, Kate. You can't ever get back what you lose." I shook my head. "No. But you can build something new with what you have left." He looked at me for a long time before nodding. "You really are your mother's daughter." That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. I had her fire, her compassion, her refusal to give up even when life seemed impossible. But I had his heart too, the part that believed in impossible dreams. And together, those pieces made me whole. It was around that time that Mom started painting again. She'd always been an artist, long before the bills and the exhaustion stole that from her. One afternoon, I stopped by her house and found her standing in front of a canvas, brush in hand, sunlight spilling through the window. The painting was of the lake. The same lake where she and Dad had first fallen in love. "It's beautiful," I said, stepping closer. She smiled, her eyes glimmering with quiet joy. "It's where it all began. I thought maybe it was time to start over from the beginning." "Do you think it's ever really possible to start over?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She just dipped her brush into the blue paint and said, "You don't start over, sweetheart. You start forward." Those words echoed in my head for months. Start forward. That's what I wanted the foundation to stand for. Not erasing the past, but building from it. Every woman we helped, every student we mentored carried a story of survival, and I wanted them to see that their scars weren't signs of weakness. They were proof that they'd lived through something worth learning from. A year later, when we opened our first shelter in my hometown, the ribbon-cutting ceremony felt surreal. The sign above the door read, "The Harper Center for Hope." I named it after my mother's maiden name, Harper, because she was the reason I'd learned how to fight for myself. The building stood right across from Murphy's Diner, as if fate had placed it there deliberately, to remind me where it all began. I remember standing on that small stage, the wind tugging gently at my hair, the crowd filled with familiar faces. Pete was there, of course, standing proudly beside the mayor, and next to him was my father, his hand resting on my mother's shoulder. I looked at them both and felt this rush of emotion so strong it almost took my breath away. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled at first. "This place," I began, "isn't just a building. It's a promise. A promise that no one has to go through life alone, that no one's story ends in the struggle. Because I learned something in a diner one ordinary afternoon, that even the smallest act like signing your name can change everything." There was silence for a moment, and then applause, loud and heartfelt. I looked at my father. He was smiling, but his eyes were wet. My mother reached for his hand, and for a moment, I saw the reflection of everything we'd lost and everything we'd rebuilt. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty halls of the new center. The walls were freshly painted, the furniture spotless, the air still carrying that new scent of possibility. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the front desk and whispered to myself, "We did it." A voice came from behind me. "No, you did." I turned and saw my father standing in the doorway. He looked tired but proud, the kind of pride that comes from watching your child become everything you once hoped they could be. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I said softly. He shook his head. "You would have found your way no matter what. I just got lucky enough to watch you do it." We stood there in the quiet for a long time. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I want you to take over the company when the time's right." I blinked, surprised. "Dad, I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "You have my vision, my strength, but you lead with heart. The world needs more of that." I didn't answer. I just stepped forward and hugged him. For the first time, I wasn't hugging a stranger who shared my blood. I was hugging my father, the man who had once been lost and found his way back. In the weeks that followed, I started learning everything I could about the business. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to build a bridge between two worlds, the world I came from and the world I found. Every decision I made, every meeting I led, I carried that waitress inside me. The one who'd once wiped down tables and dreamed quietly of something more. Sometimes, when I'd leave the office late at night, I'd walk down the street, grab a cup of coffee from a small cafe, and sit by the window watching the city move. It reminded me of those nights at the diner, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the steady rhythm of ordinary life. And I realized something. No matter how much changes, a part of you always stays where you began. I wasn't ashamed of that anymore. I was proud of it. Because the girl who once lived off tips and borrowed textbooks had become the woman who built something lasting. And maybe that's the point of it all, to go so far that when you look back, you can barely recognize the person you used to be, and yet still love her completely. One evening, as I locked up the new shelter after an event, a young girl approached me. She looked no older than 20, with tired eyes but a determined smile. "You're Kate, right?" she asked. "The one who started all this?" I nodded. "That's me." She hesitated before saying, "I just wanted to thank you. This place, it saved me." I didn't know what to say. I just smiled and placed a hand over hers. "Then promise me one thing," I said softly. "When it's your turn, you'll save someone else." She nodded, eyes shining. "I will." As I watched her walk away into the night, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pride, it was peace. The kind that comes from knowing your story didn't end with you. It continued, branching out into lives you might never even meet. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and looked up at the sign one last time. The street was quiet, the air cool and calm. And for a moment I thought about the past, the diner, the signature, the tears, the laughter, the years it took to get here. Then I whispered, almost to myself, we started forward. And somehow that was enough. Strange how memories work. Some fade into the background like whispers and others stay, sharp and alive, replaying themselves in the quiet moments when you least expect them to. Sometimes, late at night, when the world slows down and the hum of the city fades into silence, I still see it all, the diner, the pen, the way his signature curved across that paper. It's like the universe keeps showing me the exact moment everything changed, reminding me that even the smallest things can rewrite an entire life. Why father passed away 3 years later. It wasn't sudden. We had time to talk, to forgive, to sit together in the sunlight and say everything that needed to be said. But still, nothing prepares you for that final goodbye. I remember sitting by his bedside, his hand weak in mine, the sound of machines quietly marking the seconds. He looked at me and smiled, faint but steady. Promise me, he whispered, that you'll keep building. Not for me, but for you. I wanted to tell him I would, but my throat felt tight, words tangled behind tears. He squeezed my hand gently. You found me once, he said, his voice barely audible. And because of you, I found myself. Don't ever stop finding who you are, Kate. Not even when it hurts. Those were his last words to me. The kind of words that don't fade, they echo. After the funeral, the world felt quieter. My mother was strong, though I could see the ache behind her eyes. We held on to each other like survivors of the same storm. Some nights I'd find her sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, staring up at the stars. I'd sit beside her and we wouldn't speak. We didn't have to. The silence between us had become its own kind of language that I kept my promise. I expanded the foundation, reaching more cities, more lives. I worked with teams of young women who reminded me of myself, hopeful, uncertain, burning with quiet strength. Every time one of them walked across a stage, diploma in hand, or opened the door to her first apartment, I felt it. The ripple effect of one signature, one moment, still moving through time. Sometimes I visit my father's grave alone. It's on a hill overlooking the city, the same skyline he used to admire from his office window. I bring fresh white lilies, his favorite, and sit in the grass, talking to him like he's just away on a business trip. You'd be proud, Dad, I say. We opened 3 more centers this year. Mom's painting again, and her work's being displayed in a gallery downtown. Oh, and guess what? Murphy's Diner is still open. Pete refuses to retire. The wind always picks up around then, gentle but steady like a response. Maybe it's just coincidence. Or maybe it's him, still finding his way back, still showing up in the ways he can. A few months ago, I was asked to give a speech at a university graduation. Standing there in front of hundreds of students, I saw pieces of myself in all of them, nervous, hopeful, standing at the edge of their own stories. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about money or success. I talked about that diner, about my mother's strength, and about the day I realized the man signing his name wasn't just a stranger. I told them, you won't always recognize the moments that change your life when they happen. Sometimes they'll look ordinary. Sometimes they'll look like a stranger's signature. But one day you'll look back and realize everything you are started there. When the ceremony ended, a young man approached me. He said, I haven't spoken to my dad in 10 years. Maybe it's time I tried. I smiled through tears. It's never too late, I said. Sometimes all it takes is one brave step forward. That's what life keeps teaching me, forward. No matter how many times you fall apart, no matter how much it hurts, the only way out is through. You start forward even when your legs shake and your voice breaks. Now every time I walk into the Harper Center, I stop for a moment in the lobby. On the wall there's a framed picture, the lake, the same one from my parents' past. Below it, engraved in bronze, are my father's words. Success is measured in moments like this. I touch the metal softly, tracing the letters with my fingers, and I whisper, I hope you're watching. Because I know he is. In every laugh that echoes through the halls, in every life rebuilt, in every new story that begins here. He's there. Sometimes when I'm alone in my office, I still hear the sounds of the diner in my mind. The clink of coffee cups, the low hum of conversation, the scratch of pen against paper. It all feels so far away, yet so close, like an old melody you never forget. And I realized something, that version of me, the waitress who thought her life would always be small, she's still here too. She's the reason I never stopped believing that even the forgotten deserve a chance to be found. People often ask me what I'd say to the girl I was back then, before all of this happened. I think about that sometimes. I think I'd tell her, keep going. The world hasn't forgotten you. Your story isn't over yet. One day, everything that broke you will make sense. Because it did. Every heartbreak, every long shift, every unanswered question. They all led me here. To this life. To this piece. My mother says the past is like a photograph. You can't change what's in it, but you can decide how to frame it. And maybe that's true. I don't want to erase the pain or the struggle anymore. I want to honor it. It made me who I am. So, if you ever find yourself lost, sitting somewhere you don't belong, wondering if the world will ever notice you, remember my story. Remember that even something as small as a signature can change everything. You never know who you'll find when you start looking for answers, and sometimes, you'll find more than you ever expected. Sometimes you'll find yourself. And maybe that's what this whole journey has been about, not finding my father, not building an empire, not creating a legacy, but learning that love doesn't need perfection to be real. It just needs to stay. So here I am. Kate, the waitress, the daughter, the founder, the woman who learned that broken things can still shine. And if I've learned anything at all, it's this. The heart always finds its way home.